All right, everybody, we are live. Welcome to this week's Cryptocopia Live AMA. If you're new to Cryptocopia, we are a community focusing on all things cryptocurrency. We're perfect for seasoned vets and beginners who are new to the space. I'm your host, Michael Krupkala. You can find me on Twitter or Discord at Mike Spellcheck. And today we are joined by not one, but two guests from the Tendermint Cosmos team. They're building an internet of blockchains, and we're very excited to talk to both of them. Chango Unchained is the community architect in charge of community growth and developer relations, and Sunny Agrawal is a research scientist for Cosmos, focusing specifically on crypto economics and fault-tolerant design. Enough from me. Chango, Sunny, how are you guys doing today?
Doing well. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, doing great. I'm excited to be on.
Great to hear. Yeah, no, we're really happy that you were able to join. Listen, to start things off, I just wanted to ask how you got started working with the Cosmos project.
Sure, I guess I'll go ahead and start. So I got involved with blockchain maybe about 4 years ago now. I was a student at UC Berkeley and was exploring Bitcoin and Ethereum and a bunch of other things. And then at some point, I got really into proof of stake after one summer, and so I just started reading and learning more about that. And then from there, I kind of, looked into Tendermint, and I'm like, oh, this is seems to be a reasonable proof of stake design. And, I really like this Cosmos design of application specific blockchains. And so kind of just deep dove into there and reached out to the Tendermint team and kind of said, oh, is there anything, I can help out on? I just really want to get something going. I want to learn more about proof of stake, and, working with the team is the best way to do that. So I started doing that and got involved from there.
Cool. And Chango?
Yeah, so I heard about Bitcoin in 2014, and there was one of my friends that I went to college with was a miner, and he started telling me about this, digital currency. And that was around the same time I was going down the macroeconomic path, looking into how our economic system works, and going down the conspiracy theory rabbit hole of how the Fed, the evil Fed controls our monetary system, and Bitcoin is the way out, starve the beast. So I got interested in cryptocurrency through Bitcoin, and then eventually got involved with the industry by becoming a journalist. So I was covering a breadth of topics, and then eventually that led me down Cosmos and joining the Tendermint team to lead the communications and community growth strategy. So that's where we are now.
And I'm sure the Illuminati came up at some point while you were looking into the Fed and everything else.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
By the way, great work on the space helmet. It really ties in with the whole Cosmos theme. So, in
my past life, I was an astronaut at NASA. So I'm just kidding. I wasn't an astronaut, but I was working at.
But the Jet Propulsion Lab, right?
Yeah. Unfortunately, not as an astronaut.
Okay, well, in your next life, and then Sunny, for our next AMA, you could maybe wear the Byzantine general's costume that you were telling us about when we were off the air before the live stream started.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, one of my favorite costumes. I also have a great pirate costume, so you can ask me for that one as well.
Okay, sounds good. Well, listen, you guys, congratulations on the mainnet launch. So that happened, I believe, on March 14th, just a few weeks ago. How has the launch gone so far? What kind of feedback have you received from the community?
It's been going great. We launched, and we've been running for 2 weeks. There have been no halts of the network. There's been no sort of no bugs in the code. All the delegation has been going fine. It really been exactly what we expected. There's a lot of cool governance discussion going around very early on in Cosmos, which is really fun. And even none of the validators have gotten slashed. It's just been very smooth. And I really like a lot of the discussions that have been happening in the community around what we did was one interesting thing we did was we launched the chain without the ability to transfer tokens. So all you can do right now is stake and vote on governance proposals. And so one of the first governance proposal that's coming out is the ability to turn on sends. And so it's really fun to watch this whole governance process take place.
Yeah, I can imagine. How many validators are on the network securing just the Cosmos hub for right now? Is that correct?
Yeah, right now there's, I believe, somewhere in the ballpark of 80 validators.
Okay.
And is 100? The protocol allows up to 100 validators. Currently, unfortunately, because we didn't launch with a GUI, so the unfortunate outcome of that is that there is some centralization in voting power delegated to a few of the validators. And so I expect that there would be a lot more distribution of the voting power once there's more secure wallets coming online that allows people to delegate directly to validators. So that was one of the things that is creating a lot of contention in the community, is the distribution of the voting power, and also the conversation about enabling atom transfers. Because right now, currently on the exchanges, there are only atom IOUs and not real atoms being transferred. And so we have seen a very high community engagement rate to vote and to allow transfers to be enabled. Because what we've seen in the DAO on Ethereum, which was the first decentralized application to have launched on the Ethereum blockchain, is that there was very low voter participation, and we were worried about that. But it seems that the Cosmos community is like very highly engaged, and everyone really wants to push this atom transfers through, so that we could start, exchanging real atoms everywhere.
That's really great to hear. That's pretty encouraging, because I know it's been a concern. Low voter turnout has been a concern, even aside from the DAO. I think with Decred, although I could be wrong about that, but with some other, vote-oriented projects. So what does the roadmap look like? The immediate roadmap look like post mainnet release? When would you expect token transfers to potentially be voted to go live?
Well, tentatively, we have the atom transfers proposal ending on April 16th, and so tentatively that looks to be the date.
Okay. And then hypothetically, if that vote was rejected, would there then be a second vote with a second month-long window? Like, what does that organization look like?
Yeah, so one of the things that's actually happening right now is that some people were actually uncomfortable with how this first vote was actually worded. And so it kind of did this one-round commit where it said, like, oh, we'll enable transfers based off of a GitHub commit, in which, based off of some code that Tendermint, the company, will put out that will have transfers enabled. And a lot of people, rightfully so, were worried, saying like, wait a second, that who knows what Tendermint might put in that code, right? It was a little bit too vague for a lot of people's likings. Okay. And so that proposal is actually probably going to get rejected, because today a lot of the people changed their vote actually from yes to no. And what they're going to do is someone's making a new proposal where they're saying it's going to be kind of a two-round commit almost, where it's going to be first, we're going to say, let's enable transfers. And then if that gets voted yes, then Tendermint, the company, which we work for, will go ahead and write some code. And the next round will have a specific GitHub hash of the code that will say, this is the code that's going to be upgraded to. And so this is good, because now people have 2 weeks to actually look at the code that we put out and see, is that what we want to commit to running? And so so this is kind of what I meant by there's some interesting governance conversations happening about how to coordinate hard forks and whatnot. So
yeah, I mean, to be honest, that's a big part of what's drawn me to the space. It's these experiments that you watch publicly in real time, where there's the cutting edge of technology, where you haven't seen models built and really rolled out in this way, but you also have this I guess, this tension, but it's a really constructive tension where you have a centralized project at the very beginning and outset of the project. By its nature, you have to have a certain amount of people building something, whether that's a technology stack from the ground up or an app on the iOS store. It has to be in fewer hands than a greater amount of hands, because at the early stages you're designing it, and if you have too many cooks in the kitchen, there'll be confusion. The work won't get done because there might be issues with who is assigned to which work. How do you avoid challenges like that? How do you draw the line as to what should be shared with the community, what should be centralized primarily, and then when should that be shared with everybody else?
Sure. So this is something we've still been kind of like learning as we go, because
Sure.
like I said, no one's ever launched a public BFT based chain. So one of the things we've been kind of taking it a little bit incrementally. So, for the long time, over a year, Tendermint was sort of like the main people who were looking at the code, and there were some open source contributors who were taking a peek at it, but people weren't really looking too deeply into it. And they kind of, we were the main ones developing it. Then we started a process called Game of Stakes, which was this like public incentivized test net where many validators joined in. And what this kind of did was it encouraged an initial validator community.
Mhm.
And so we got that community involved. And so now the number of entities went from one in the Tendermint company to 100 different validator companies, or 80 different validator companies, or kind of practicing running the software, playing with it. And many of the validators have started building tooling like explorers or validator tooling. Then, now what we did with mainnet launch, but why we launched without transfers, is now we kind of brought the delegators into the field, where we're saying, okay, everyone who participated in the original fundraiser, now you can delegate your coins and delegate to your validators. You can practice with the governance system, you can practice with staking and delegation, the validators can. And so now we went from down. And then when transfers are enabled, then it's kind of at the next step where it's like, okay, now we're opening up to the entire world, not just people who managed to buy into the fundraiser 2 years ago. So it's kind of this incremental process where, first it was Tendermint, then the validator community, now the entire delegator community, and then once transfers are enabled, anyone can become an atom holder and start playing with the software. And then hopefully, like Chango said, a lot of there's already a number of block explorers out there, a number of wallets. And so as more of these come out, it will become more accessible for more people. So kind of this iterative approach from trying to shift it from this relatively centralized project to decentralized. And now hopefully the goal is AIB Tendermint doesn't have the ability to just unilaterally make changes anymore. And this has some effect on our development style as well. Because earlier it used to be oh, I wanted to add a feature, I just go code it up and add it in, right? I get it approved by a couple other, 2 other reviewers, and it gets in. And now it's oh wait, every change I want to make to the code has to go through this governance process and everything. So now it's it's a little bit getting used to on our hand as well. But that's kind of been the goal of the goal, I think, of the first year of Cosmos is really just this process of, for example, we don't even have IBC enabled yet. IBC is our main interchain transfers, right? We launched without IBC. Our goal for now is just to test proof of stake and BFT blockchains. And let's focus on testing that for a couple of months. And then in about 6 months time or so, then we'll enable IBC and allow it to start talking to other blockchains.
Okay. Now, if you could both, Chango, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so speaking of IBC, right now we are in the process of specifying, deeply specifying the protocol. However, it's not fully implemented yet. And so we're opening up this specification and implementation process in this TC39 format. That's also the same format that the ETH 2.0 implementers have adopted. And that's sort of the open source way of collaborating across a really large network. So we're hoping that the process looks something like AIB and Tendermint sort of specifies the core protocol, and then be able to socialize that across an open source network and have contributors start, coming in and building out pieces of that. So right now on our GitHub, the Cosmos SDK and Tendermint GitHubs, we have 140 distributed free and open source developers contributing to it. But, a lot, like 90% of the GitHub activity is concentrated around 7 to 8 core developers. And those are currently, like centralized around Tendermint employees. But the hope is that with IBC, for example, we could start opening that up and decentralizing the core development team, and similar to how Bitcoin has done it through this bit process.
Okay. And I was actually just going to compare it to Ethereum. Originally, pretty centrally deciding that they were going to fork the chain after the DAO hack happened, however many years ago, to where we're at now, where anybody developing can submit an EIP, an Ethereum improvement protocol, that the community, largely will vote on. And it's not necessarily Ethereum core that, is the only group that can submit one of those, or are the only votes that matter, or have a more heavily weighted vote than, other developers who are working open source in their spare time.
Yeah.
Right, totally.
So the important piece of this governance process right now is for, us as a community to come together and figure out how this process should go, and what the voting period should look like, and sort of what gets specified on the proposal itself. So right now, the original Atom Transfers proposal was sort of underspecified in that there was no guideline, right? And so that's why this first proposal is sort of it was vague, and that's why there's justification to reject it as a whole. And so we're experimenting right now, and through this trial and error, this giant experiment between thousands of participants, we're kind of figuring out what sort of needs to be specified in a governance proposal, how long it should take in between each proposal, and how much we should wait and allow for discourse to happen before the community as a whole comes to consensus and executes on the proposal.
Okay.
There's a lot of implications for the long-term network outlook.
Cool. Awesome. Why don't we, real quick note actually to Cryptocopia, you guys, just wanted to let you all know that we're going to switch to questions, I would say within probably 10 or 15 minutes. So make sure that you are, letting us know what you want to hear from Chango and Sunny in the AMA thread in Cryptocopia, because we would love to hear from you and let you, ask whatever you want to hear. In the meantime, why don't we actually drill down and talk a little bit more about IBC, the inter-blockchain communication, if I have the acronym right. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, that's right.
Awesome. Okay. So as I understand it, that is the method by which different blockchains who might not necessarily have a lot of, a programming language in common, or a lot of, architecture in common, that is the design by which they communicate to each other and transfer data from one chain to another. How does that work exactly?
Right. Exactly. So essentially what IBC is it's supposed to be a very nicely general protocol which allows two blockchains to prove, so blockchain A will prove something about the state of itself to blockchain B. And how this works is that blockchain B will have to have an on-chain light client of blockchain A. So it really is just an extension of the sidechains idea that was first proposed by Blockstream back in 2014. But what we do is we designed it so it's a two-way sidechain rather than just one way, and it's designed specifically for BFT-based chains. But what we don't want is to only work with Tendermint consensus. So the idea is to abstract it so it can work with chains running Tendermint, Casper, Honey Badger, any of these sort of BFT-based protocols, as well as work with a variety of, architectures, right? So, the first thing that we're focused on, obviously, is making it work with the Cosmos SDK, which is our development framework. But we also, that's why we created this IBC working group to make it abstract enough so that, on the working group right now includes like Loom, Agoric, We'd love to get some people from Parity on, so we want to make sure it's compatible with Substrate. We have Prismatic Labs, who's one of the ETH 2.0 developers, so we're trying to get IBC, make sure IBC is compatible with ETH 2.0. So kind of really designing this well-specified general protocol that then can went and be implemented by all of these different development architectures, so they can all speak the same language. And so it's kind of like how the TCP/IP stack kind of had to proliferate. They had to come up with a common standard, and then they had to go implement this common standard in all of the different OSs that were around back then.
Okay. Which leads to why you guys call Cosmos an internet of blockchains, because it's roughly similar to TCP/IP.
Yeah. I think the entire Cosmos vision shares a lot of analogies with the internet, and so we even taken to calling it this term we picked up recently called the interchain, and so a lot of the ideas about we think about IBC is very similar to TCP/IP. The relationship between chains and the zones, Cosmos zones and Cosmos and the hubs are kind of like ISPs, and so a lot of the way it gives us a nice mental model by which to think, comparing it to the internet. So the interchain.
Right. So this interchain vision is really just an idea, and so that's why it's one of the core principles in building IBC to make it this generalized protocol that every single blockchain should be able to use to communicate is that it's dissimilar from Polkadot and ETH 2.0 in that it's this flat model of all these different blockchains communicating with each other, and there's no overseer, so to speak, that's kind of dictating how the general state machine is going to be secured. So ETH 2.0 with its sharded model, even though it's many different chains, and Polkadot with its many different parachains, it's still all of them are still opinionated under one roof, under their security model. So with this interchain vision, the hub is just one ISP, for example, that allows many different blockchains to connect to it, and the hub itself could be connected to another ISP like hub, and that one could have many different blockchains connected to it. And then essentially, let's say blockchain A is connected to hub A, and hub A is connected to hub B, and there's blockchain B connected to hub B. So basically that's 1, 2, 3 hops for blockchain A to talk to blockchain B in a secure and trustless manner.
That's actually something I wanted to ask you guys about, because if you just recently released Cosmos Hub, which is for the time being a central point of contact for the eventual blockchains that are going to be connected to the hub. And while I'm trying to think of the best way to ask this, while the hub and sort of the spokes, the different blockchains that are connected to it, are all keeping track of a constantly changing state, hypothetically, you start adding a few different other hubs that are, validated in maybe different ways. How do you still maintain the same source of truth if you have a few different centralized points where you're connecting, 8, 9, 10, 20, however many blockchains to those hubs?
Sure. So essentially, this depends on what you're trying to keep a source of truth about. So one of the things about IBC is it's just proving something about a state of one chain to another. Mm-hmm. What you're proving could be many different things, but what we're focused on right now is token transfers, like the token transfer protocol. And so now when we're talking about tokens, it's like, IBC, like I said, basic TCP/IP. On top of that, there's different higher level protocols. On TCP/IP, you have SMTP for email, you have FTP for file transfer, you have HTTP for web, right? So token transfer is just one of these protocols. And part of this token transfer protocol on top of IBC is going to be, it's path dependent. So that's what's important. So if you transfer a token from, let's say, BTC, right? You transfer it from BTC to the Cosmos hub to Ethereum, that will be different than a BTC that goes along the path of Bitcoin to Iris Hub, which is another hub in the Cosmos ecosystem that just launched recently, to Ethereum. So on Ethereum, these are going to be two different tokens. And so you essentially do have this trust model of every chain that you hopped along the path of. And so you do want to try to keep your trust paths as shallow as possible. You don't want, so that's one of the benefits of the hub, where it kind of provides, like, if you want to transfer things between chains, you should try to go back to the hub and then to the next one, rather than you wouldn't go straight from it. You don't want this trust path to keep going around. You want to like backtrack as often as possible before you send forward. Does that make a little bit of sense what I mean here?
I think so. So is it more ideal to have fewer connections or to send your transaction through a shorter path than a longer path?
Yeah. So let's say someone gives you the option you're on Ethereum, right? And you're trying to get some BTC to do something with, and someone gives you the option of sending, a BTC that went through the path of Bitcoin, Cosmos Hub, Ethereum, versus they give you the other option of sending you a BTC that went along the path of Bitcoin, Hub, Iris, Polkadot, Ethereum, right? You'd prefer the one with a shallower path because there's a less trust requirement. Now, how wallets and UIs and stuff present this information to the user is honestly still a point of research, right? Like a UX research, essentially. Like, how do we show this information to users as to keep them informed about the security decisions they're making, but yet not overwhelm them with data that it's hard for them to comprehend. And so that's, one thing that we're still heavily kind of looking into. But yes, that is the idea. You do want to have some method of differentiating between these different paths of tokens. So that's why, that's why the hub is useful, because let's say you have Bitcoin BTC that goes Bitcoin Hub Ethereum, and you want to send it to another chain, let's say to Tezos, right? What you'd want to do is, instead of sending it from Ethereum directly to Tezos, even if they both implement IBC, you'd want to first backtrack from Ethereum to the hub and then to Tezos. So now you'll just have Bitcoin Hub Tezos instead of Bitcoin Hub Ethereum Tezos.
And all of these blockchains are meant to be like clients of each other. So they're tracking state of the other blockchain.
The other nice thing about the hub and spoke model is that most chains will only have to be like running a like client for a few for the hub chains, right? They don't have to run a like client for every other chain. Mm-hmm. And that's what the hub will do. The hub will take on that burden. It is an application specific blockchain whose sole purpose is to IBC connect to all of these other chains. While these other chains have other purposes that they're trying to do. They're serving some functionality, whether it's a DEX or prediction market platform or something, right? Mm-hmm. But like, they want to, most of their throughput, they shouldn't be like burdened with like doing IBC tracking of like hundreds of other chains. They can IBC track one chain, which is the hub, or any hub that they choose. And then those hubs will take on the burden of being IBC trackers for hundreds of chains, because that's what they're specialized and purposefully designed and written to do.
They're built to do that in the first place.
Right, exactly. And that's kind of really one of the main premises of Cosmos, where, kind of how I got into it was I was really into Ethereum because of a lot of the interesting applications that were being built, but something about the Turing complete VM and just this idea of writing everything on one state machine that's like general purpose just didn't seem to click with me. And I take this example of there's a lot of analogies here where I like to say Ethereum is an empire and Cosmos is building a world of nation states. And there's a lot of reasons I can, give you that story. But one of them is it's about around specialization, where like we had different nation states, we allowed different ones to specialize. And, that involves writing state machines that are specially written. Perfect example is if you're building a payment system, right? You probably want to use UTXOs, because UTXOs are just more efficient for that use case. There's a reason Bitcoin was written like that. But Ethereum, the EVM, requires you to use a count model because it's what's necessary for the average use case, the general purpose use case. But that kind of sucks if what you were trying to build is a payment system, because you're not You don't have that amount of control to like specialize your chain in order to be optimized for that use case. And that's kind of an example of what I mean. Where one of the things the hub will do is be optimized and specialized for the purpose of being good at talking to many other chains over IBC. And so this specialization is really kind of one of the core tenets of Cosmos, of like why we think that this will help scale the entire system.
So
Cool.
one of our slogans is, we call ourselves building the foundation of a new token economy. So that sort of builds on Sunny's idea of having these specialized nation states. Basically, before we had this global international market where international trade happens, these individual economies had to specialize and then become much more efficient and optimized at doing the one thing that they're good at. And then as trade routes opened up, like IBC connections opened up between these different specialized economies, they were able to grow the pie, so to speak. And so that's why in the future, we're thinking that this interchain vision sort of nurtures a much larger value being created for the entire cryptocurrency ecosystem that currently isn't being addressed in these empire models, because still a lot of these empire models are siloing the value within their own empires rather than creating this explosive wealth in this overall broader economy.
I mean, if you look at it from the macroeconomics metaphor that you're both talking about, you're growing the pie. You're growing the pie when you're connecting different siloed economies, because more trade tends to create wealth for everybody.
Yeah. Right. Exactly. Yeah.
And opening up trade routes across all of these different specialized economies, definitely.
Okay.
We've seen this happen in the world.
And that's kind of what another analogy, the TCP, IBC has this nice TCP IP analogy, but it also has this other nice analogy, which I'd like to do, which is containerization, which is like, one of the things that allowed, in the last 50 years or so, is we kind of standardized shipping containers. So now, and what that did was it allowed, if anyone, ever go to a port, you always see the same type of shipping container there, right? And same dimensions and everything. And what this did was it allowed a ship traveling from any port in the world to go to any other port in the world and be able to unload and load its cargo. And that standardization is what enabled like the global trade we see today. And so IBC, you can kind of think of it as the containerization, where let's come to agreement on a common standard so that then we can allow these packet transfers between any chain.
Cool. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. All right. Why don't we switch over? Enough from me. Let's move it on to open up the floor and get some questions from the community. First up, Squidbox wants to know, will there be an official Cosmos GUI wallet, and when will that be released?
Yeah. So we have been building a GUI wallet, a fully featured one, for quite some time. It's called Looney. We rebranded it to the name Looney, which is a blend of the word for LOONEI, which is the name of the Canadian $1 coin, and Luna, the Latin word for moon. So that has been in beta for the last week and a half or so, and we're about ready to announce its readiness. There's just some legal considerations that we're kind of finalizing at the moment. So that should be coming out, and that would help with distribution of delegations once that's out.
Got it. Thank you very much. Next up, Disco Gem wants to know, we were actually talking a bit about moving currencies between chains, but they were wondering specifically if you guys could explain a bit about how currencies are bridged, how Cosmos can bridge to other currencies, specifically using a privileged zone, and how the bridge zone validator works.
Sure. So this, I think, is asking specifically about a concept we have called peg zones, or maybe some other, another common term for these is bridges. And so what we do here is, question essentially is, how do we talk to chains that don't natively implement IBC, right? So we want IBC to become the standard that as many chains implement. But what happens if someone doesn't want to implement IBC? And if, for example, Bitcoin, it's not going to happen. We're not going to implement Bitcoin IBC into Bitcoin's core protocol just because of the nature of how Bitcoin development works, right? It's designed to be conservative, and I respect that. So then what we have to do there is we have to create this thing called a peg zone, which is it's a way of like hacking IBC into a system that doesn't natively implement it. And so what this involves is running what we call like an adapter zone, which kind of puts a finality overlay on top of a non-IBC, not a non-BFT chain, and what it does is it gives the validator set of one chain a multi-sig on the chain that it's trying to talk to. So whether that's Bitcoin or Ethereum, right? It basically a validator set of the adapter chain will have a multi-sig on the other chain, so let's say Ethereum, right? And so the validator set here, that means that they have to be running a full node for the other chain rather than a light client. And that kind of changes the design of the system a little bit. And so it's not going to be feasible for these chain like validators. And so for now, people are going to be running the peg zones is going to be the Cosmos Hub. It's not feasible for them to run peg zones for every chain in existence. We want IBC to be adopted, but for some chains that are maybe just too valuable that we need to connect them, for example, Bitcoin and Ethereum and some of these chains, the Cosmos Hub, one of the benefits it will do, one of the features it will provide to other chains in the Cosmos ecosystem is the validator set of the Cosmos Hub will take on the burden of running the peg zones, operating the peg zone for Ethereum and Bitcoin and whatnot. And so it'll be the validator set of the Cosmos Hub who's controlling this multi-sig. And the idea is if they do anything malicious on Ethereum, like with that multi-sig, they send money somewhere they weren't supposed to, they'll be able to be slashed on the Cosmos Hub. And so it'll have this equivalent security to the Cosmos Hub itself.
Got it. All right. Thank you for explaining that. Next up, Old School Cool in the white. They're great, right?
Yeah.
We have a very creative community. Old School Cool wants to know, in the white paper, I saw something about incentivizing hackers. How does that work?
So this was in the white paper. It's unfortunately not in the implementation at the moment, but essentially what was happening there is we want our validators to be very secure and highly have very high security. And so one of the things that we'll do is, we want to implement a system where if you can prove that you can hack a validator, so if you say, I'm going to cause this validator to double sign at this block height, and then you cause them to do it, they'll get slashed and you'll get a portion of the bounty essentially. And so it's kind of incentivizing, people to attack other validators and thus forcing everyone to harden their setups and make them as hack resistant as possible. Like I said, keep in mind, this hasn't been implemented yet. This is an idea that was floated in the white paper. And like I said, a lot of the things in the white paper, we're not at V1 yet. We're at V0.1. Like IBC isn't even there yet. And so some of these things, governance, now the roadmap is not in our hands anymore. Now the roadmap is in the hands of Cosmos governance. And so there might be some things that they might choose to keep or not. And I do know that this whole incentivizing hacking thing is something that's a little bit contentious, and some people have the idea, hey, maybe we shouldn't be doing this. And so I'll be excited to see what governance decides to do there.
Yeah, well, to be fair, we have incentivized that with our Game of Stakes program and bug bounty program. So that wasn't built in protocol, but that was something that was achieved out of band that did have the same desired outcome. And so another thing that I wanted to add on top of Sunny's statement about us being on, being in 0.1 basically of achieving the whole interoperability vision of a 1.0 is that Cosmos is still furthest along on interoperability compared to everyone else claiming that. So
it's very, very early days for everybody.
Yes.
Yeah.
And anyone claiming otherwise is being hyperbolic.
We're not going to name any names though. I'm not. You guys can. Feel free. Take as many pot shots as you want.
I'm just saying that's the reality of it.
No, it's very true, and I think it's an important point to make because we were talking about earlier, so much hype in the space. There are so many projects who, because there's this incentive to pump the market price, pump the price of coins, not saying not accusing anybody of specifically doing that, but the incentive is there when you combine a very, very new arena in technology and distributed systems with a public distribution of valuable tokens, valuable currencies, valuable whatever they are. You get this dance of deliverables, honesty, transparency, and some bad practices that unfortunately, with the distributed nature are just going to be there for however long.
Yeah. So with the ethos of, I guess, the Tendermint team itself is that we are all about being completely transparent with where we are. So very important.
Also, instead of maybe giving a hot shot and calling someone out, maybe I'll give a congratulatory one. Is I played the other day with the Burner wallet or with XDAI, and that was really cool. So I know POA Network has been doing some cool stuff. I think they use the parity bridges, but so the thing with parity bridges is it's designed specifically only for EVM to EVM, and so that's kind of one of the differences. A lot of the stuff that's been going along so far has been specifically designed with one framework talking to the same framework. But IBC, the goal is to generalize it and have it work with any framework. But given that, the XDAI bridge to Ethereum was pretty cool and pretty seamless UI UX. So that was cool.
Awesome. So next up, we actually have a question from Twitter. I don't have the handle in front of me, but thank you to whoever asked this one. How does the governance voting of Cosmos work specifically? And how would you go about proposing a proposal?
Sure. So the voting system on the Cosmos Hub currently works such that someone makes a proposal, and then there is a period of deposits where people can deposit funds. And currently you need 512 atoms to be deposited on a proposal before it gets moved to a voting period. This acts as a spam resistance mechanism, so people can't just spam with proposals. And so the nice thing is whoever's proposing it doesn't have to pony up the entire deposit themselves, right? This is why there's a deposit period. They can create a proposal, put some of their own money in their deposit, and they can sort of go crowdfund for, say, can anyone else who's interested in this proposal, can you also deposit on this? Once there's enough deposit, then it goes into a 2-week voting period where people can vote yes, abstain, no, or no with veto. No with veto is sort of a stronger type of no, and it allows, instead of the threshold being 50%, its threshold is then 1/3, so 33%. This is if something is you're very much against it, or it's spam or something, you would want to vote no with veto instead of no. That being said, then, this on-chain voting is really sort of just one thing that we do is unlike Tezos or Polkadot, we take a more Bitcoin, Ethereum model where we don't auto-upgrade the code. The on-chain voting is sort of a signaling mechanism at the end of the day. Really what matters is what code people run. And so the on-chain voting is a way of gauging the coin holder, the atom holder sentiment. But there's other stakeholders who you also want to gauge the sentiment of, whether it's the users, the zone, users of other zones, right? Right now, this governance is simpler because it's just the Cosmos Hub. It's not connecting to anyone. So it doesn't influence anyone else. But once we start connecting to other chains, what happens on the Cosmos Hub affects people on other chains. So we need a way to bring that sentiment into the system. And so there needs to be more of a social consensus of what code people decide to run. But this is sort of the signaling. One of the problems I think with Bitcoin and Ethereum is that they didn't have an official signaling mechanism. So with Ethereum, they have these carbon votes and stuff. But I think the problem is they're not considered official enough. And because of that, they have low voter turnout and stuff. But if they were a little bit more official in a way, I think they would serve a much better job at acting as a signaling mechanism to gauge the sentiment of coin holders. And so that's kind of why we kind of built it into the protocol as this official signaling mechanism.
Yeah, so governance is a core module inside of the Cosmos SDK. The Cosmos SDK, just so people are aware, is this blockchain application framework that easily allows developers to, compose these different features into their blockchain application without building it from scratch itself. So such that they could customize a blockchain very easily with pre-built pieces that they could just plug and play together. And so governance is one of those core modules. And so from the start, we set the precedent that we want Atom holders to have a stake in the direction of where the Cosmos Hub and the Cosmos ecosystem goes. And so, from the start, we've had two proposals so far. One of them was to increase the block creation rate, I believe. And then the second one, this more important one, which is a major proposal, is to enable Atom transfers. We had to date, I think it's 60% plus quorum of people voting. So that's a very high participation.
Wow. That's very high.
Yeah. So we had, we had very, very high voter participation. The Cosmonaut community is incredibly engaged, and I'm very impressed with how educated everyone is.
And what would you chalk up that voter participation to? Would you chalk it up to sort of an officialness to the voting? A sort of, a way of, well, let me just ask you, why do you think that the community is so engaged?
So it's engaged because, so that number seems very high for a couple of reasons. One, that is the percentage of staked atoms that has voted. So in our system right now, atoms that are not staked do not get to participate in governance. You have to stake them in order to participate in governance. So it's 60% of the staked atoms. That being said, another thing though is that our community is very active at the moment. We already have, I think, close to 50% of all atoms already staked, which is good, which is what we're hoping for. And so, so that means that community is relatively active. And so out of the 50% of people close to 50% of people who've staked, 60% of them have been voting on the proposal, and the proposal has only been active for about 2 or 3 days. And so it's a 2-week voting period. Now, the other thing though is keep in mind this number. So how it works right now is we have a I'll call it a hacky liquid democracy, where delegators inherit the vote of their validators unless they vote differently. So if a delegator doesn't vote, they'll automatically inherit the vote of their validator. But if they vote, then they'll override their validator's vote. And this is sort of a temporary solution until we get a chance to implement proper liquid democracy, where you should be able to delegate your voting power to anyone, not just your validator. And eventually we'll even have transient delegation, where you can delegate to someone and they can delegate that to further on and whatnot. But for now, the goal was to say let's get as much. So part of what delegators are looking at when they choose their validator is the who do they think is a good governance participant, and who will vote according to their interests, and who do they have a generally aligned ethos and philosophy with.
Sure.
So those kind of things together and like you said, the officialness. So I think these kind of things together kind of account for the high voter turnout.
To be fair, our entire Atom holder community is waiting for Atom transfers to be enabled for them to start trading atoms. So that's probably why there's such a high voter turnout, and that this is signaling to everyone. People have been waiting for the Cosmos Hub to launch in the last 2 years, and now we're at the very end of that launch milestone, and now they're finally able to get their real atoms into their pockets and start moving them around. And so everyone says that yes to enable atom transfers. That's probably why there's such high voter turnout.
Okay. Okay. I mean, that makes a lot of sense. But at the very least, it's a very engaged community, and not all projects can say the same thing. Next up, Double QP is wondering, so from an interoperability point of view, you also have Icon, Ion, WanChain, Cardano, and some other projects. So how is Cosmos better, and how are they related to these other projects?
Yeah, go ahead, Chandler, you go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. My understanding of Icon's model is that they're also an empire. A lot of these are also empire models in that they're allowing interoperability within their own chain. So that doesn't mean interoperability between disparate chains running different consensus engines. Whether it be have the property of probabilistic finality or having finality. It's that they have cross, I guess, contract interoperability within their own VMs. That is Icon at least.
Yeah, I mean, and to continue adding on to that, so Ion, all of these different existing ones kind of are different in their own way. WanChain is like, I think they're kind of EVM based rather than, like I said, Cosmos really has been focusing on the specialized application specific blockchains. And that, I think, is something that not these other platforms really are focused on. So, WanChain kind of focuses on their root chain is running this EVM. And I think they've done a lot of cool innovation on that, where like, I know they've added like Monero, like ring signatures to their EVM chain, which is pretty cool. Ion, I know they've been working on like some sort of interoperability stuff, and Icon. Honestly, I haven't really been like keeping up too much with them, just because I don't think any of these projects really have any launched platform yet, and so it's kind of really hard for me to go inspect their code and whatnot. But I've been following pretty closely with what Polkadot has been doing. And I think there's a lot of stuff that we can learn from them, and they can learn from us, and a lot of great knowledge sharing happening there.
Yeah, I did take a look at Aeon, and I did look at their bridging protocol some months ago, maybe at least 8 months ago. That my understanding of that is that they're building, they're converting their ERC20 and bridging it to the Aeon platform. So that's more specific to their blockchain. Just
okay.
Their ERC20 Aeon to Aeon platform, Aeon native token.
But not to other blockchains.
Yeah.
All right. Last question for right now from the community. I may have one or two more afterward, and we may have one or two come back up from them, but this is the last one for right now. Squidbox wants to know the relationship between Tendermint and Cosmos.
Sure. So Tendermint is a little bit of an overloaded term because it kind of actually means three things. One is it's Tendermint BFT is the name of a consensus protocol. Tendermint Core is a name of a piece of software that implements Tendermint BFT. And then Tendermint Inc. is the name of the company that developed Tendermint Core, as well as a lot of the software for the Cosmos. And so the relationship there is, so I'll talk about first Tendermint Core. So the Cosmos Hub is written using a framework called the Cosmos SDK, and it uses Tendermint Core as its consensus engine, and so it uses Tendermint BFT as its consensus protocol. And so that's sort of the relationship between Tendermint BFT and Cosmos Hub. And we think that Tendermint BFT is sort of Tendermint Core is at the moment, I would say it's the only production-ready consensus engine, that BFT consensus engine. And there are more in production. I'm really excited about the work that POA Network has been doing on their Honey Badger implementation, which is really cool. But for now, if you're trying to build a BFT-based chain, Tendermint Core is probably your best bet, and that's why the Cosmos SDK supports that right now. And over time, we'll support more consensus engines. And then the relationship between Tendermint, the company, is that we are just the Interchain Foundation is the name of the foundation that did the Cosmos fundraiser, and then they contract the Tendermint company to build the software. And so we have it. And so the Tendermint team is kind of, we're the ones who kind of wrote the Tendermint core software. We wrote the Cosmos SDK. We wrote the Gaia state machine. Gaia is like the name of the software that's specific, using this software for the hub itself. We've written, we're working on a lot. We're part of the spec working group for IBC, and kind of, some of our team members have been kind of spearheading that process. But like I said, having it as open working group. And yeah, so Tendermint company has been been writing a lot of the software for a lot of the Cosmos project right now. But we hope to get, and over time, we're going to see more and more development teams working on software. So hopefully we're going to see a lot of the validators started. We already have seen a lot of the validators started open sourcing a lot of their stuff and like contributing back to the code base. So that's really exciting.
So just to build on what Sunny was saying about the relationship between Tendermint and Cosmos, is that in a more visual way, is that you can think of Tendermint as the underlying BFT library, as one half of a whole blockchain. So you could take Tendermint, which is a module inside that could be used within the Cosmos SDK framework, which allows you to plug on the state machine, higher level state machine logic. And so with these two pieces together, you could compose a whole blockchain. And so that's kind of the framework that we allow, that we've built to enable application developers to easily build a custom blockchain from pre-built parts. So it's, literally, I have the low-level hard stuff to implement, which is P2P logic and consensus logic, and then I plug my business logic, my state machine logic on top. And this whole composition framework is called the Cosmos SDK. And so we ate our own dog food, and we built the Cosmos Hub blockchain using the Cosmos SDK, which is running on Tendermint consensus.
Okay. Cool. All right. Thank you too for clearing that up. I know there are a lot of moving parts. It's helpful. Thank you. Listen, why don't we just round things off? I want to hear from the two of you. What are you excited to see in 2019? What kind of developments, not just in Cosmos Tendermint, but in the space in whole, really what are you excited about for the rest of the year? It's a very general question, very broad, I know.
I guess I'll go ahead and start off. I'm on the Cosmos front. I'm excited for enabling of IBC soon, and just a lot of chains to start using the Cosmos SDK. So we already see a number of blockchains adopting the Cosmos SDK and starting to build on it. Some of the big ones include Binance, True Story, number of projects who are already kind of using the SDK. And so just excited to see what kind of stuff gets built. And, I've written a lot of Solidity, and I've written a lot of Cosmos SDK. And I think it's a very pleasurable development experience. And so hopefully I'm excited to see more people start using that. Outside of Cosmos, some of the stuff I'm really excited about in general is, so one of the things that Cosmos will do is I think it will reduce the relationship between a chain's functionality and the value of its money token or fee token asset. So an example of this is there'll inevitably be a Cosmos chain that takes the Zcash state machine, the logic of Zcash, and allows you to use it with any token. So, you don't have to use Zcash for privacy. You can move your BTC to that chain and use the privacy properties of that chain with your Bitcoin or with your DAI or whatnot. So what I really think will happen is we're going to see, and so, I think a lot of the tokens that justify their existence by the functionality of the chain will have to, we'll see what happens with that, right? For example, Zcash token, if I can use any token for privacy features, why do I need the Zcash token? I think one thing that will solve this is, a lot of tokens will start shifting into becoming staking tokens. And the other thing I'm excited about is, hopefully it'll push for more innovation on the monetary, the underlying monetary policy of tokens. So that I find particularly interesting. Like, I think there's a lot of cool new assets that are being created on the chain that have nothing to do with functionality of a chain, but rather like, one thing I'm particularly excited about lately is Grin, just because I think it has a cool story there, but I think it has this like nice monetary policy of like 60 Grin per minute. And, I think it's a much more reasonable, non-perverse monetary policy than Bitcoin. I also, I'm excited about things like Circles, which is this like cool decentralized UPI project. And so I just think a lot of this like innovation, I hope that like we'll see a lot more innovation along like interesting assets, like new stable coins and things like that.
I'm glad that you brought up Binance, Sunny, because that's something that I'm, you just reminded me that that's really exciting. I'm curious to see how decentralized exchanges sort of follow Binance's lead and maybe start building their decentralized counterparts, I guess. Another project that I'm extremely excited about is Handshake. I am like a Handshake shill.
Could you fill us in? I'm not familiar with Handshake.
Yeah, so Handshake is wanting to build a blockchain in place of ICANN. So ICANN is basically the gatekeeper of for security certificate authorities. And so DNS is already inherently decentralized, but the one centralized piece of DNS is the root zone. And so Handshake has very cleverly implemented a blockchain in order to be the trusted notary of the root zone. And so with a blockchain in ICANN's place, it's able to disrupt ICANN, and it's able to allow people to exchange domain names in a trustless way that is also decentralized, such that the miners of the proof of work blockchain is able to act as the decentralized source of certificate authorities. So that's extremely exciting to me because I love anything that subverts authority.
That's why we're all here, right?
Yes. Exactly.
Well, listen, I can't thank you both enough, Chango, Sunny. It's been a pleasure talking to the both of you about, what you're involved with, what is coming down the pike with Cosmos and Tendermint. But is there, while we still have you, anything that you'd like to let us know about? Anything we didn't ask about? Any, like a Telegram channel or blog post that you want to direct us to for Cosmos?
Yeah, so our Telegram channel is t.me/Cosmos Project. And, if you subscribe to our newsletter on cosmos.network, you get all of the most up-to-date information. You'll know which conference we're going to be at, which meetups we're giving for free. We have a lot of hackathons coming up, coming down the pipeline all over the world. There's going to be, large prize money involved, and we're going to be launching something very soon. It's currently in stealth mode, but subscribe to our newsletter to hear about that. This very exciting thing that is in stealth mode currently is going to basically coordinate all of the different stakeholders within the Cosmos ecosystem to become engaged, to want to hold atoms such that they get to participate in this greater, bigger ecosystem thing. So sign up for our newsletter for that, and follow our Cosmos account, the Cosmos Twitter account, because that's where we push every single update in real time. So you'll hear from us through there every update related to Cosmos.
Cool. Sunny, anything that you care to add? No, yeah, I think Chango mostly covered it. Check out our Twitters and Meet blog. I run a podcast called Epicenter, so listeners can check that out as well.
Guys, I'm sure almost all of you know Epicenter already, but listen to Epicenter. You've been running for 5 years now, you said earlier, correct?
Yep, 5 years. We just celebrated our 5-year anniversary in January.
Congratulations.
I actually grew up in crypto listening to Epicenter. So thank you, Sunny and Brian, Sebastian, and Mayor. Epicenter is great. Oh my goodness. Such great content.
All right. Well, on that note, shameless plug for Cryptocopia, because we are trying to follow in your footsteps ever so slowly. Follow us on Twitter at crypto_copia. That's where we're announcing all of our guests each week. We have these weekly AMAs every Thursday. So we will be announcing our next guest pretty soon. You can follow us there. Make sure to subscribe, hit that notification bell on YouTube, and you'll get notifications about when we're going live each week. And I think that about does it. Chango, Sunny, thank you both for doing this with us. It's been a pleasure. We will be following what you are up to, and we're excited to see your next steps. And Cryptocopia, we will see you next week.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks.